Students for a Free Tibet is an international network of more than 650 chapters at universities, colleges, high schools, and communities in over 35 countries. The profile and membership grew with the advent of the Tibetan Freedom Concerts. The group even organized protest events on Mount Everest and the Great Wall of China. With their adventurous activities, this group endeavors to promote the Dalai Lama's cause for Tibetan independence. But did you know that the CIA created Free Tibet groups to help manifest the Anglo-American Empire? That would mean that idealist kids work indirectly for the CIA. Now that does sound crazy at first, but I am here to change your paradigm. Now I will not go into depth about the CIA's active role in Tibet because there is not enough time, but please feel obliged to Google the topic if you don't believe me. But what I would like to do is talk about Tibet's sovereignty debate, because by determining Tibet's legal status, we can judge if the CIA's involvement was right or wrong. Now some of you may say that Tibet was independent, so that the CIA's actions, although unconventional, was justified and still is. One can say that they were for once being altruistic and aiding an oppressed people. However, a whole list of American academics, Grunfeld, Goldstein, Gelder, Strong, Parenti, not the Chinese communists now, say that Tibet was not independent but autonomous, and that the CIA's support was simply to fight a shadow war against China. Even today, and throughout the Cold War, not a single country could find any historical legitimacy for Tibet's independence. Now, could they all be lying, secret communists who support the Chinese government? Let's just assume yes. Let's just say that there is a world conspiracy against the Dalai Lama and his followers. Let's even go as far as to say that Bill Clinton, who used to support the Tibetan cause, became brainwashed after he read Professor Grunfeld's book on Tibet. Let's say the traditional imperialists, the CIA and British imperialists, are for once honest and truthful. As a consequence, I had to find my own untouched source, and behold, my Christmas gift pays off. In a 1903 National Geographic article on Tibet, it not only describes Tibet's feudal theocratic society, but also explains that Tibet was autonomous, not independent. To make it short, I shall quote some important passages written by a National Geographic author who summarized an account by G.Z. Zobikov, who resided in Lhasa for over a year. He was a Russian Buddhist and a graduate from the Oriental faculty of the University of St. Petersburg. He was also given the Przyansky Prize by the Society for being the first Russian Tibet explorer. He says, "Since the 15th century, all power, civil and spiritual, has been nominally in the hands of the Dalai Lama, but China maintains a Manchu resident and an army. Until the Dalai Lama's 22nd year, the government is in the hands of a regent appointed by the Emperor of China. In order to avoid strife in selecting a Dalai Lama, the Electoral Council places 3 strips of paper with the names of 3 boys in an urn, and the Manchu resident removes one with a small staff. The Dalai Lama's council, in whose hands is the actual power, embraces 4 so-called gallants appointed by the Emperor of China." Now, was the National Geographic 100 years ago sympathizers for the Chinese government before it even existed? No, the National Geographic consisted of explorers and adventurers, the American Front for Geography and History, who documented the state of the world, and thus documented that Tibet was not independent but autonomous. If this weren't enough, Free Tibet supporters would then argue that according to the, at the time, anti-communist International Commission of Jurists, that Tibet in 1913 to 50 demonstrated the conditions of statehood as generally accepted under international law. However, in the opinion of the Chinese government, this condition does not represent Tibet's complete independence, as many other parts of China also enjoyed de facto independence when the Chinese nation was torn by warlordism, Japanese invasion, and civil war. China insists that during this period, the ROC government continued to maintain sovereignty over Tibet. The Provisional Constitution of the Republic of China in 1912 stipulated that Tibet was a province of the Republic of China. Stipulations concerning Tibet in the Constitution of the Republic of China, promulgated later, all stress that Tibet is an inseparable part of Chinese territory, and the government of China exercises sovereignty in Tibet. In 1927, the commission in charge of Mongolian and Tibetan affairs of the Chinese government consisted of members of great influence in the Mongolian and Tibetan areas, such as the 9th Panchen Lama, the 13th Dalai Lama, and other Tibetan government representatives. The 9th Panchen Lama, who ruled over one-third of Tibet, accepted an honorific title and a high government position from China. The 13th Dalai Lama was bestowed more honors, and Tibetans were sent as congressmen to the central government. Throughout the Kuomintang years, no country in the world gave Tibet diplomatic recognition. Delegates from Tibetan areas attended the drafting committee for a new constitution of the Republic of China in 1925, the National Assembly of the Republic of China in 1931, the Fourth National Congress of the Kuomintang in 1931, and a National Assembly for drafting a new Chinese constitution in 1946. A trade mission sent by the Tibetan government attended another National Assembly for drafting a new Chinese constitution in 1948. Thus, in conclusion, Tibet was not annexed or occupied, but reunified, suggesting that due to imperialist and civil wars, China was fragmented and run by individual warlords. Tibet did, however, exercise self-governance at the time of this fragmented China, but never successfully declared independence despite pro-independence forces inside Tibet, thus was never recognized by any other independent country, and was therefore not independent anywhere in the real world except for in the hearts of a few. So what was the CIA's business in Tibet? Well, they had no justifiable business in Tibet. As a result, the National Endowment for Democracy was set up in the early 1980s under President Reagan in the wake of all the negative revelations about the CIA in the second half of the 1970s. The idea was that the NED would do somewhat overtly what the CIA had been doing covertly for decades, and thus hopefully eliminated the stigma associated with CIA covert activities. It was a masterpiece to create an organization with a nice-sounding name. Alan Weinstein, who helped draft the legislation establishing NED, was quite candid when he said in 1991, "A lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by the CIA." In effect, the CIA has been laundering money through NED. So this great NED is nothing else than the CIA. If you go onto their homepage, their membership list sounds like the who's who of American neoconservatism and the military-industrial complex. There I also found the Senior Program Officer for Asia, meaning China, John Kenneth Knaus, one of the first CIA agents in Tibet. Through the NED, the Tibet Fund, Tibet Information Network, the Tibetan Literary Society, and Voice of Tibet was created in the International Campaign for Tibet, ICT. In return, the Students for Free Tibet was created in August of 1994 as a project of the U.S. Tibet Committee and the International Campaign for Tibet, ICT, the NED-CIA creation. So if you follow the trail of these daughter organizations, you get back to the CIA. Thus, the Dalai Lama's nonviolent campaign for Tibetan independence and U.S. foreign policy elites who are actively supporting Tibetan causes through the NED is just a systematic program for the continuation of imperialism. It is indeed brilliant by making unaware students do their dirty work. So on which grounds could one still support Tibetan independence if Tibet was not independent in the first place, and now knowing that the whole movement is a CIA relic of the Cold War? Self-determination? But then according to the United Nations, any attempt aimed at the partial or total disruption of the national unity and the territorial integrity of a country is incompatible with the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. What is true is that there is an abundance of Chinese military control and paranoia, which leads to the opposite of the declared harmonious society. But can they be blamed if CIA-backed bombings have occurred as late as 1996, and the secret CIA NED movement is still continuing today? One also must note that the Dalai Lama and his oligarchy does not represent the bulk of the Tibetan people who have been freed from the slave society. Is it therefore reasonable to call the brutal uprising by the previously privileged class a fight for freedom, when most Tibetans have no interest in the return of a theocratic oligarchy? This distortion of truth is only possible through the political manipulation of our Western media.